25 of Seoul's most elite financial analysts had worked for 6 straight days trying to trace the billion-won bleeding from Park Enterprises. 25 brilliant minds with degrees from Harvard, Oxford, and Seoul National University, armed with the most sophisticated forensic accounting software money could buy, and not a single one could find where the money was disappearing to. The executive boardroom on the 47th floor had become a war zone of crumpled reports, empty soju bottles, and shattered pride. The city of Seoul glittered below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to their failure. Then at 2:47 a.m., a female cleaner with a mop bucket and a yellow sticky note walked into the boardroom. Evelyn Hart was nobody. A 29-year-old American drowning in visa anxiety, working night shifts just to keep her dying brother alive back in Ohio, living in a cramped Gazawan barely bigger than a closet. She had an Ivy League mathematics degree collecting dust while she scrubbed floors in a country that would never see her as anything more than foreign help. She was invisible, the kind of person powerful men looked right through without seeing. But when her eyes landed on the financial data still glowing on those massive screens, something clicked. In exactly 40 seconds, while wiping coffee stains from the conference table with one hand, she scribbled 3 lines on a sticky note that exposed the entire embezzlement network. She had no idea that standing in the doorway behind her, watching her every movement with cold, calculating eyes, was Park Do-jin himself, the Korean Mafia boss whose territory stretched from Gangnam to Busan. A man who had buried more secrets than she had years lived. A man whose name was whispered with fear in the backrooms of Seoul's most exclusive establishments. A man who could make people disappear with nothing more than a phone call. Before we begin this story, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. If this story moves you, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a tale about brilliant minds and dangerous hearts. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Now let us find out what happens when a brilliant mind catches the attention of Seoul's most dangerous man and learns that some knowledge is worth more than freedom itself. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Evelyn didn't hear him approach. His movements were too controlled, too precise. But she felt the weight of his presence the moment he stepped out of the shadows, expensive leather shoes silent against the polished floor. 누가 허락했어? His voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp, cold, entirely in Korean. Who gave you permission? Evelyn froze, the yellow sticky note still gripped between her fingers. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly turned around. Park Do-jin stood 3 feet away, and up close, he was even more terrifying than the rumors suggested. He was immaculately dressed in a tailored black suit, the kind that cost more than she made in a year. His white shirt was open at the collar, not careless, but deliberate. A man so powerful he didn't need to prove it. Dark, focused eyes bored into her with the kind of intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. His face was angular and unreadable, and a tattoo curled along his exposed forearm. An unmistakable mark of his underworld life, contrasting sharply with the luxury watch on his wrist. This was not a man who asked questions. This was a man who cornered answers. Evelyn started in Korean, her accent clumsy but passable. I'm sorry. I was just cleaning. I thought. English, he interrupted, switching languages without effort. His English was flawless, unaccented, which meant he'd already known exactly who she was before stepping into this room. You thought what, Miss Hart? The use of her name sent ice through her veins. He knew who she was. Had probably known for weeks. I thought the room was empty, she managed, forcing herself to meet his eyes even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. Her mother had once told her, never show fear to predators. Park Do-jin's gaze dropped to the yellow note still clutched in her hand, then back to her face. He took a step closer, and Evelyn's shoulders tensed, but she didn't shrink back. She was seated at the conference table now, gripping that note like it might protect her, fully aware that what she knew had just shifted the balance of power in ways she didn't understand yet. What did you write on that? His tone was devoid of emotion, which somehow made it more menacing. Evelyn swallowed hard. She could lie. Should lie. But something in those calculating eyes told her he already knew the answer. This was a test. She took a breath, Deciding truth was her only option. I noticed the patterns in your financial data. The money isn't disappearing randomly. Someone's stealing it systematically. If you trace account 3829, you'll see exactly where it's going. For a long moment, Park Do-jin said nothing. He simply stared at her with an expression that could have been carved from stone. In 15 years of running an empire built on secrets and violence, no one had ever dared to speak to him with such direct honesty, especially not a foreigner clutching a mop. He pulled out his phone with calculated precision. Marco. 47층으로 와. 47th floor. Now. Less than 90 seconds later, the elevator doors opened and a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes stepped into the boardroom. Marco was Park Do-jin's right hand, the kind of man whose reputation preceded him in every dark corner of Seoul's underworld. 계좌 3829를 확인해봐. Park Do-jin ordered without looking away from Evelyn. Check account 3829. Marco's eyes flicked to Evelyn with sharp curiosity. Who was this American woman in a cleaning uniform sitting in the boss's inner sanctum? But he asked no questions. He moved to the computer terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The room fell into suffocating silence. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her heart pounding so hard she was certain they could both hear it. The overturned coffee cup on the desk dripped dark liquid onto failed analysis reports, the mess symbolic of how quickly order had collapsed. Through the windows behind them, Seoul's skyline glowed with neon and ambition, a city that never slept and never forgot. She was thinking, calculating consequences in real time. Fear coiled in her stomach, but beneath it was something sharper, clarity. She hadn't meant to get involved, but she understood numbers the way most people understood breathing. And now she understood something else. She knew too much. Then Marco looked up, and for the first time, genuine shock crossed his hardened features. 그녀가 맞습니다. She's right. His voice was hoarse with disbelief. The money's flowing into an offshore account in the Caymans, disguised through 23 layers of shell companies. The recipient is... He paused, face darkening. Director Shin. Your head of security operations. Park Do-jin said nothing, but the air in the room suddenly turned so cold that Evelyn could see her own breath. She watched his jaw tighten imperceptibly, watched his fingers flex once, the only outward sign of the controlled fury beneath that immaculate surface. Director Shin. A man who'd worked for the Park family for 12 years. A man Park Do-jin had trusted with his life. Park Do-jin's eyes never left Evelyn's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, which made it infinitely more dangerous. You just identified a traitor in my organization. He leaned forward, both hands pressed flat on the desk, his posture deliberately territorial. In my world, that makes you either very valuable or very dangerous. A pause that stretched like wire pulled taut. I haven't decided which yet. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the yellow note. She wasn't panicking, she was thinking. This conversation was happening 47 floors above the world, beyond the reach of rules or mercy. Park Do-jin owned power. She owned the answer. And both of them understood the unspoken truth. Once Park Do-jin confirmed her intelligence, Evelyn Hart's life would no longer belong to herself. The question wasn't whether he would let her walk away. The question was what price he would demand for her brilliance, and whether she would survive paying it. 3 years ago, Evelyn Hart had been a different person entirely. She'd been a Cornell mathematics prodigy with a full scholarship, a girl who could see patterns in chaos the way other people saw colors. Her professors called her brilliant. Her classmates called her intimidating. She'd had offers from Wall Street, from Silicon Valley, from research institutions that whispered about Field's metals and breakthrough algorithms. The world had been spread before her like an equation waiting to be solved. Then her parents' car hit black ice on an Ohio interstate at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in December, and everything collapsed into variables she couldn't control. Her younger brother Liam was 17, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 6 months earlier, and suddenly Evelyn was his only family. The medical bills swallowed her scholarship fund. The treatment schedule made finishing her degree impossible. And when Liam went into his first remission, The experimental protocol his doctors recommended wasn't covered by insurance, wasn't even available in the United States. It was in Switzerland. It cost $500,000. Evelyn had done what desperate people do. She'd taken a teaching position in Seoul, the only place that would sponsor her visa on short notice, planning to save enough for Liam's treatment. But teaching jobs fell through. Visas got complicated. Months turned into years, and somehow Cornell's star mathematician ended up mopping floors in a building she should have owned. She'd learned to be invisible, learned to keep her head down, her accent quiet, her intelligence hidden. In a country where she would never fully belong, invisibility was survival. Every night she cleaned the same floors, watched the same executives leave their analysis on glowing screens, sent the same percentage of her paycheck back to Ohio where Liam's condition was slowly, inevitably worsening. Tonight had been no different. The building had emptied by 2:30 a.m. The analysts stumbling out exhausted and defeated after 6 days of failure. Evelyn had pushed her cleaning cart into the executive boardroom. The city sprawling below in a sea of neon and ambition she'd never be part of. She'd started with the windows, then the tables, methodically erasing the evidence of other people's important lives. But then her eyes had caught the financial data still displayed across 3 massive monitors. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the coffee stains and crumpled papers. But her brain didn't work that way, it never had. Patterns emerged whether she wanted them to or not. Numbers aligned themselves into stories. And this story was obvious. Embezzlement. Systematic. Sophisticated. But not sophisticated enough. She'd grabbed a yellow sticky note from the scattered supplies, scribbled 3 lines of analysis while wiping down the conference table, and stuck it to the desk without thinking. A reflex. Like correcting a student's math homework. Then that voice behind her, cold and sharp as winter steel. Do you know what you just did? Now, standing in this frozen boardroom with Park Do-jin's dark eyes dissecting her and Marco's shocked confirmation still echoing, Evelyn understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd revealed herself, made herself visible, and in doing so, she'd become dangerous. Park Do-jin straightened from the desk, his movements precise and controlled. He pulled out his phone again and swiped through something. Security footage, Evelyn realized with growing dread. He turned the screen toward her. There she was. Weeks of footage. Cleaning the boardroom. Pausing occasionally to look at screens she shouldn't understand. Her face caught in high-definition surveillance, evidence of every moment she'd thought she was invisible. I've been watching you for 3 weeks, Miss Hart. His voice was conversational now, which somehow made it worse. Ever since you stopped to stare at the derivatives analysis on level 42. Most cleaners can't even pronounce derivatives. You stood there for 4 minutes studying Black-Scholes pricing models. Evelyn's mouth went dry. She'd been so careful. Or thought she had been. Cornell, class of 2019. Would have graduated summa cum laude if you'd finished. He said it like he was reading her obituary. Published 2 papers on pattern recognition in financial systems before you dropped out. Mathematics scholarship. Dead parents. Sick brother in Ohio. He paused. Expired visa that I personally kept active, because I wanted to see what you'd do. The words hit her like physical blows. He'd known everything. Had been watching, waiting, evaluating. She hadn't found his embezzlement problem by accident. He'd left it there, a test she'd walked right into. You work for me now, Park Do-jin said. It wasn't a question. Wasn't even an offer. It was a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of a man who'd never been refused. Starting tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., you'll report to the 48th floor. Evelyn found her voice, forcing it steady. I'm just a cleaner. I don't want trouble. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement of a weak move in chess. Too late, Miss Hart. You're already in it. He nodded to Marco, who pulled a folder from seemingly nowhere, and set it on the desk between them. Your brother needs treatment that costs $500,000. Your visa expires in 6 days. And now you know the identity of my organization's traitor, which makes you either an asset I protect or a liability I eliminate. He let that sink in. Let her do the math. Work for me, And your brother gets his treatment. Your visa becomes permanent. You'll never clean another floor. His eyes held hers, dark and absolute. Refuse, and Director Shin isn't the only person who'll disappear tonight. Evelyn looked at the folder, at the security footage still frozen on his phone, at Marco standing silent and lethal by the door. She thought of Liam, his last video call, the way his hands shook when he thought she wasn't looking. She thought of her Cornell professors who'd told her she could solve anything. They'd been wrong. Some equations had no good solutions, only the least terrible one. What exactly would I be doing? She asked quietly. Park Do-jin's smile was cold and satisfied. He'd already known her answer before she did. Solving problems that people smarter than you have failed to solve. Finding patterns in chaos. Keeping my empire running smoothly. He picked up the yellow sticky note, studied it like an artifact. Starting with finding everyone else Director Shin told about the money. It wasn't a job offer. It was ownership. And they both knew it. Evelyn took a breath that felt like surrender. When do I start? You already have. Park Do-jin walked toward the elevator, Marco falling into step behind him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at her, still in her cleaning uniform, still clutching her mop like a lifeline, standing in a boardroom 47 floors above a city that would never be home. Go back to your Gazawan tonight, Miss Hart. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow your old life ends. His voice dropped to something almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Welcome to mine. The elevator doors closed, leaving Evelyn alone with the glowing screens and the certain knowledge that she'd just sold her freedom to save her brother's life. She looked down at her hands, still stained with cleaning chemicals, and wondered if brilliance had always been her death sentence, or if she'd just been waiting for someone powerful enough to notice. Evelyn's Gazawan was exactly 2.8 square meters. She'd measured it once during a particularly claustrophobic night. Barely large enough for a single mattress on the floor, a desk she had to crawl over to reach, and a narrow shelf where she kept 3 days' worth of clothes. The shared bathroom was down the hall, the shower stalls always occupied, the kimchi smell from neighboring rooms seeping through walls so thin she could hear her neighbors' phone conversations. This was what $400 a month bought in Seoul when you were foreign and desperate and invisible. She sat on her mattress at 4:47 a.m., her laptop balanced on her knees, waiting for Liam's face to pixelate into view across 13 time zones. When he appeared, she forced her best smile, the one that hid everything. Hey superstar, she said, keeping her voice light despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. How's Ohio treating you? Liam looked worse than last week. His face was gaunt, dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes, and when he smiled back it didn't reach them anymore. He was 20 now, but leukemia had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. Same old, same old. He tried to sound casual, but then the cough hit. Wet, rattling, the kind that made Evelyn's chest tighten in sympathy. He turned away from the camera, his shoulders shaking, and when he came back his hand trembled slightly as he wiped his mouth. Sylvie, it's just. How bad? Evelyn interrupted, already knowing the answer from the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. Dr. Chin says the current protocol isn't working anymore. Liam's voice cracked. They want to try the Swiss treatment, but Eve, the cost. Don't worry about the cost. The words came out fiercer than she intended. I'm handling it. You're working night shifts cleaning offices. You can't possibly. Another cough, longer this time. When it subsided, he looked directly at the camera, and she saw the fear he'd been hiding. I don't want to die, Eve. But I also don't want you destroying your life for mine. Too late, she thought. Already done. You're not going to die, she said instead, with a certainty she'd bought from a Korean Mafia boss just 3 hours ago. The money's coming through. I promise. She ended the call before he could ask questions she couldn't answer, before he could see the truth written across her face. Then she sat in the dark of her tiny room, listening to Seoul wake up outside her window, and wondered what she'd just become. At 7:45 a.m., she stood in front of Park Enterprises wearing the only professional clothes she owned. A cheap blazer she'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago and black slacks that had seen better days. She felt like an imposter, like someone playing dress-up in a world she'd lost access to when her parents died. The elevator to the 48th floor required a keycard she didn't have. A security guard appeared immediately, not asking, just knowing, and escorted her up. The doors opened onto a floor she'd never seen during her cleaning shifts. All glass walls and minimalist luxury, Seoul spreading out below like a kingdom. Her new office had her name already on the door. Evelyn Hart, strategic analyst. As if she'd always been meant to be here. But the two guards stationed outside her door told a different story. She wasn't being protected. She was being contained. Miss Hart. The voice was female, cold, and spoke Korean with the precision of someone who'd been correcting people her entire life. I'm Executive Director Jisoo Park. We need to talk. Jisoo was in her late 30s, sharply beautiful in the way that required expensive maintenance, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Evelyn had made in a year of cleaning. Her smile was polite and venomous. You're the cleaning lady who thinks she's clever. Jisoo said it in Korean, deliberately, testing whether Evelyn would understand. When Evelyn's expression didn't change, she switched to English, her accent perfect. How long do you think that lasts? Before Evelyn could respond, Marco appeared. Conference room. Now. The boss wants you in the strategy meeting. The boardroom was full of executives in tailored suits, 15 pairs of eyes turning to assess her as she entered. Jisoo sat at Park Do-jin's right hand, her territory clearly marked. Evelyn was directed to a chair at the far end. Physically present but symbolically excluded. Park Do-jin entered last, and the room's energy shifted immediately. He sat, opened a file, and slid it down the table to Evelyn without preamble. Supply chain discrepancies. 6 months of data. Find the pattern. It was a test. Everyone in the room knew it. Evelyn picked up the file, her heart hammering. The numbers swam before her eyes. Inventory reports, shipping manifests, supplier invoices in Korean and English and Mandarin. She was aware of Jisoo watching her with barely concealed contempt. Aware of the other executives whispering in Korean. Aware that she was supposed to bow, to hesitate, to know her place. Instead, she spread the documents across the table and let her mind work. The pattern emerged in 4 minutes. It always did. Terminal 3 at Incheon, she said, looking directly at Park Do-jin, not the executives between them. Someone's intercepting shipments before customs inspection, replacing legitimate cargo with counterfeits, then routing the originals to Busan. They've been doing it every third Thursday for 6 months. The discrepancies are hidden in the weight-to-volume ratios. The room went silent. Park Do-jin's slight smile was colder than his frown had ever been. Different is exactly what I need. Jisoo stood abruptly, bowed sharply to Park Do-jin. A gesture Evelyn notably hadn't made, and left the room. The hatred radiating from her was almost tangible. Evelyn returned to her office at noon, already exhausted from hours of being watched, evaluated, tested. She just wanted 5 minutes alone to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. But when she swiped her keycard to enter her gazawan that evening, needing her laptop, needing her clothes, needing something familiar, the door wouldn't open. A maintenance worker she'd never seen before appeared instantly. Miss Hart, your belongings have been relocated. Relocated where? But she already knew. Had known the moment Park Do-jin said tomorrow your old life ends. Corporate housing. Level 52. Mr. Park's orders. She never agreed to this. Never consented to having her life packed up and moved like she was a piece on his chessboard. But standing there in the hallway of her former building, she understood with perfect clarity. Agreement wasn't required. Park Do-jin didn't ask permission. He simply took. Evelyn found Park Do-jin in his office on the 49th floor at 9:47 p.m., still working while the rest of Seoul slept below in neon dreams. She didn't knock. Didn't bow. Just walked in with 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding a target. You moved my things without asking. He didn't look up from his tablet. You're too valuable to live in a gazawan. Security risk. You don't get to make decisions about my life. Her voice was shaking now, not with fear but with rage at her own powerlessness. Park Do-jin set down the tablet with deliberate slowness and looked at her. Really looked at her, For the first time since she'd stormed in. I already have. Your visa renewal crossed my desk yesterday. I signed it. He paused. You're welcome. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her visa. The thing that had kept her awake for months. The bureaucratic nightmare that had been 1 week away from forcing her back to Ohio with nothing to show for 3 years of exile. He'd fixed it with a signature. Which meant he could revoke it just as easily. You control everything, she said quietly, the fight draining out of her as she understood the full scope of the cage she'd walked into. Yes. No apology. No pretense. Just acknowledgement of absolute power. Would you like to see your new apartment? The corporate housing on level 52 was obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Gangnam. Hardwood floors that probably cost more than her entire Gazawon building. A kitchen with appliances she didn't know how to use. Her few belongings, 3 days of clothes, her laptop, a photo of her parents, looked pathetic scattered across furniture that belonged in architectural magazines. It was beautiful. It was luxury beyond anything she'd imagined. And the door locked from the outside. Park Do-jin stood in the doorway, watching her process this. Comfortable. It's a prison. But even as she said it, she knew how ungrateful it sounded. How many people would kill for this prison? It's protection. There's a difference. He pulled out his phone, swiped through something, then showed her a photograph. A man in his 50s, professionally dressed, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. This was the analyst before you. Kim Jia-esung. He solved a problem I needed solved, then tried to leverage that knowledge for a better position. Evelyn stared at the photo. What happened to him? He retired. The way Park Do-jin said it made the word sound like a eulogy. His family received a generous severance package and relocated to Canada. No one has heard from him since. The message was clear. Solve the problems, don't ask for more. And maybe she'd get to retire too. Someday. If she was lucky. There's another case I need you to look at, he continued, as if they'd just been discussing the weather. Embezzlement again. Smaller scale, but the pattern is hidden better. It took her 4 hours, working through the night in her new apartment that felt like a luxury hotel she could never leave. But she found it. Funds being siphoned through a charity organization, routing through Seoul, Hong Kong, and Singapore before disappearing into accounts she couldn't quite trace. She sent the report at 2:13 a.m., then collapsed onto a bed that was too soft, in an apartment that was too perfect, and wondered if Kim Jae-sung had also lain awake wondering whether his intelligence would be the thing that saved him or killed him. At 3:30 a.m., there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Park Do-jin standing there with a tea tray, proper Korean tea in a ceramic set, not the cheap bag she'd been buying from convenience stores. He didn't ask to enter. Just walked past her to the floor-to-ceiling windows and set the tray down on her coffee table. Why mathematics? He asked, pouring tea with movements that suggested this was ritual, not refreshment. The question caught her off guard. What? Why not economics, finance, computer science? Why pure mathematics? Evelyn sat down across from him, accepting a cup she hadn't asked for. Patterns make sense when people don't. Numbers follow rules. They don't lie, don't change their minds, don't leave. She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. But Park Do-jin was nodding slowly, staring out at Seoul's glittering sprawl. Numbers don't betray you. No. They don't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just two people who'd built their lives around systems that couldn't hurt them. Sitting in an apartment that cost more than most people made in a year. Drinking tea at an hour when normal people slept. My father wanted me to be a pianist, Park Do-jin said suddenly, and Evelyn remembered Marco's face when she'd solved that first case. The shock that the boss was confiding in anyone. I practiced 8 hours a day from age 6. I was good. Could have been great. What happened? I turned 12. He broke 2 of my fingers to teach me that the family business was more important than art. Park Do-jin held up his left hand, and in the dim light Evelyn could see the slight irregularity in how the ring and middle fingers bent. Numbers don't betray you, but family does. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process that this man who controlled her entire existence had just offered her a piece of his own shattered dreams. The moment stretched too long, became too intimate. Then footsteps in the hallway broke it. Jisoo's voice, talking rapidly in Korean on her phone. Both of them turned toward the sound, and Evelyn saw Park Do-jin's expression shift back to unreadable stone. "You should sleep," he said, standing. "Tomorrow will be demanding." He left without another word, and Evelyn sat alone with her cooling tea, wondering what had just happened, and whether she'd imagined the vulnerability in his voice. She didn't know that Jisoo had seen everything through the glass walls. Didn't know that the photograph of Park Do-jin entering Evelyn's apartment at 3:30 a.m. was already being sent across encrypted channels to Osaka, to men whose business was built on finding weaknesses in their enemies. The Yakuza had found theirs, and they were patient hunters. 6 weeks passed in a rhythm Evelyn hadn't expected, days solving impossible problems that executives failed at for weeks, nights drinking tea with a man who was supposed to be a monster, but kept revealing fragments of something human underneath. She proved herself over and over. Currency manipulation schemes hidden in legitimate transactions. Real estate fraud buried in shell company paperwork. Supply chain vulnerabilities that could cost the organization millions. Each problem she solved bought her another day of survival. Another wire transfer to Switzerland where Liam's treatment was finally, miraculously working. The late-night sessions became routine. Park Do-jin would appear around midnight with tea, and they'd sit in her apartment overlooking Seoul's endless neon, not quite working, not quite talking, existing in some space between business and something neither of them wanted to name. One night she tried to explain baseball to him. The strange American logic of it, the way statistics told stories that had nothing to do with the game itself. He listened with the focus he gave everything, then pulled out a Go board the next evening, and taught her the ancient Korean strategy game in return. She was terrible at it. He was merciless in victory. "You think 3 moves ahead," he observed, capturing another of her stones. "Go requires thinking 30 moves ahead. Baseball requires thinking about split-second decisions made on instinct," she countered. "Not everything is chess." His slight smile was becoming familiar. Dangerous how familiar. It was during their 3rd week of this strange ritual that he told her about his father. They were playing Go. She was losing spectacularly as always, when he spoke into the silence. "My father built this empire from nothing. He was trained by his father, who was trained by his father. I was 6 years old when my training began." Park Do-jin moved a black stone with precise deliberation. Ruthless. Strategic. Emotionless. Those were the qualities he demanded. Evelyn waited, sensing this was leading somewhere he didn't usually go. "I wanted to be a pianist." The confession came out flat, emotionless, practiced. As if he'd said it so many times in his head that it had lost all meaning. "I was good. My teacher said I had perfect pitch, natural rhythm. Could have studied at Juilliard if things had been different." What happened? Though she already knew the answer from the way his fingers had trembled that first night over tea. "I turned 12. My father found me practicing Chopin instead of studying financial reports." Park Do-jin set down the Go stone he'd been holding. "He broke my fingers. Ring and middle on my left hand. Told me while I was screaming that the family business required whole hands, but didn't need artists. Priorities, he called it. Teaching me priorities." The horror of it settled in Evelyn's chest like ice. She looked at his hands, elegant, controlled, powerful, and saw the slight crook in those 2 fingers she'd noticed before but never asked about. "I'm sorry," she said, inadequate words for a childhood shattered on purpose. "Don't be." Park Do-jin's voice was matter-of-fact. "It made me who I needed to become. Emotion is weakness in this world." But Evelyn heard what he didn't say. "I wanted to be something else. Someone else." She recognized it because she'd lived it. "I had a full scholarship to Cornell," she found herself saying. "Published mathematician at 19. My professors said I could revolutionize pattern recognition theory, maybe win a Fields Medal before I was 30. I had job offers from everywhere that mattered." Park Do-jin's dark eyes held hers, listening. "Then my parents died. Car accident, black ice, wrong place at the wrong time. My brother was 17 with cancer, and suddenly I was choosing between my scholarship and his chemotherapy. Between my future and his survival. She smiled without humor. I clean floors with an Ivy League degree, because life doesn't care about your plans. No, he agreed quietly. It doesn't. The silence between them was different now. Understanding instead of distance. Two people whose brilliance had become their prison, whose families had destroyed the futures they'd imagined. Sitting across a Go board neither of them cared about anymore. Park Do-jin reached across the board, his fingers almost touching hers. The moment stretched. Evelyn's breath caught. Then Marco's voice shattered it, urgent, speaking rapid Korean from the hallway. 사장님, 긴급합니다. Boss, it's urgent. Park Do-jin pulled back immediately, his expression shifting to cold control in a heartbeat. He stood, moved to the door, had a brief conversation Evelyn couldn't fully follow. But she caught enough. Yakuza. American woman. Questions in Itaewon. When he turned back, his face was unreadable stone. You'll have additional security starting tomorrow. Don't argue. It's not negotiable. What happened? Nothing you need to worry about. But his eyes said otherwise. Said everything you need to worry about. He left without another word, and Evelyn sat alone with her losing Go position, and the memory of his hand almost touching hers. Over the next 3 days, she noticed the shadows. Men in dark suits who weren't quite subtle enough. Following her to the office cafeteria, positioned at the end of her hallway, present wherever she went. She assumed they were Park Do-jin's people. She didn't know that some of them weren't. The Yakuza were patient hunters. And they'd found their prey. It happened on a Thursday at 11:43 p.m. Evelyn had been working late, again, solving another impossible problem that would justify her continued existence. The parking garage was nearly empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Her footsteps echoing against concrete that smelled like oil and rain. She didn't see them until it was almost too late. 3 men materialized from between cars, moving with coordinated precision that screamed professional. One grabbed her arm, another reached for her mouth, and Evelyn's scream died before it started as a black van screeched around the corner. Then Park Do-jin's guards erupted from the shadows. What followed was violence so brutal and efficient it didn't seem real. Gunshots echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Bodies hit concrete with wet, final sounds. One of the attackers went down with his throat open, blood spraying across a Mercedes. Another took 2 bullets to the chest and collapsed against Evelyn's car, leaving a smear of red as he slid down. Evelyn stood frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. Couldn't reconcile the men who'd been invisible shadows with these efficient killers protecting her with lethal force. Marco appeared, grabbed her arm, not rough, but not gentle, and dragged her toward an armored car that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Safe house. Now. The safe house was a penthouse in Gangnam she'd never seen before, all white marble and floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass. Blood was still being cleaned off the lobby floor when they arrived, evidence of how close the Yakuza had gotten, how many layers of security they'd penetrated. Park Do-jin was waiting. He stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at Seoul like a king surveying a kingdom under siege. When he turned, his expression was carved from ice. This is what my protection looks like. His voice was flat, emotionless, terrifying in its control. Still think you want it? Evelyn's hands were shaking. She could still smell the blood, still hear the sound of bullets hitting flesh. But beneath the trauma was something colder, more pragmatic. She was alive. The men who'd tried to take her were dead. In the calculus of survival, that was all that mattered. I don't have a choice, she said quietly. Do-i. Something flickered in his eyes. Almost approval. No. You don't. She slept, barely, in a bedroom with guards outside and cameras watching. Woke to her phone vibrating at 6:47 a.m. with a video call from Ohio that made her blood turn to ice. Liam looked like death. His face was gray, his breathing labored, and when he tried to speak he could barely get the words out between coughing fits that shook his whole body. Eve cough. Dr. Chen says cough. The treatment isn't. More coughing, worse this time, and when he pulled his hand away from his mouth there was blood on his palm. Liam, what's happening? Protocol failed. Relapsed. They want to try. He could barely breathe now. Swiss treatment. The experimental one. But Eve, it's $500,000. There's no way. The call dropped. Evelyn tried calling back 3 times but got no answer. Just Liam's phone ringing in an empty hospital room while her brother was probably being rushed into emergency care. She sat on the edge of the bed in a safe house that felt like a tomb and broke. Not crying. Just breaking. Like something inside her that had been holding together, through sheer force of will, finally gave up and shattered. She didn't hear Park Do-jin enter. Didn't know how long he'd been standing there, watching her fall apart. The surveillance, she realized dimly. He'd been watching. Always watching. The Swiss treatment, he said, and it wasn't a question. I'll handle it. Evelyn looked up, eyes dry but hollow. Why? Because you're mine to protect. What do you want in return? Because nothing in his world was free. She'd learned that much. Park Do-jin crossed the room, sat on the bed beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, far enough that it wasn't quite intimate. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. I want you to stop fighting being mine. Not romantic. Not tender. Possessive. Territorial. The way someone claims property, not a person. But beneath the words was something else. Protection so absolute it bordered on obsession. Evelyn thought of Liam dying in Ohio. Thought of the Yakuza assassins bleeding out in a parking garage. Thought of herself, trapped between survival and surrender. Okay, she whispered. Okay. I'm yours. The words tasted like defeat and salvation at the same time. Just save him. Park Do-jin's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to cover hers. Warm, solid, absolute. He'll be in Switzerland within 48 hours. My personal physician will oversee his treatment. Cost is irrelevant. He stood, made 3 phone calls in rapid Korean that Evelyn only half understood, and by the time the sun rose over Seoul, Liam was being transferred to a private medical jet with doctors who specialized in experimental oncology. Evelyn watched it happen from the penthouse windows, understanding with perfect clarity that she'd just sold whatever remained of her freedom. That evening, a box arrived at the safe house. Inside was a hanbok, traditional Korean dress, in deep jade silk with intricate embroidery that probably cost more than she used to make in a year. The note was written in Park Do-jin's precise handwriting. Dinner tomorrow. 7 p.m. Not optional. She held the silk in her hands and wondered if monsters always announced their claim this beautifully. The hanbok fit perfectly. Of course it did. Park Do-jin had probably known her measurements before she did. Surveillance extended to everything, including the size of her body. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror in her luxury prison, barely recognizing herself. The jade silk draped elegantly across her shoulders, the intricate embroidery catching the light with every breath. She looked like someone who belonged in Park Do-jin's world. Like someone chosen, not claimed. The illusion was beautiful. And terrifying. The car arrived at 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes early, because nothing in Park Do-jin's world happened by accident. Marco drove her through Seoul's gleaming streets to an estate she'd never seen, tucked into the hills overlooking the city. Gates that required biometric scanning. Guards who recognized the car before it arrived. Wealth so absolute it didn't need to announce itself. Inside, Park Do-jin's private residence was a study in controlled power. Traditional Korean architecture merged seamlessly with modern luxury. Low tables of polished wood, paper screens that probably cost more than cars, art that belonged in museums hanging casually on walls. The formal dining room held 15 people when Evelyn entered, all of them turning to assess her with varying degrees of curiosity and calculation. Park Do-jin's inner circle. The executives who ran his empire, the lieutenants who enforced his will, the power brokers who shaped Seoul's underworld. Park Do-jin sat at the head of the table, wearing a traditional Korean suit that made him look like a prince from a darker dynasty. His eyes found hers immediately, a flash of something she couldn't quite read before his expression returned to stone. Evelyn Hart, he said, her name carrying weight in his mouth. My strategic analyst. The title felt like both introduction and warning. She was his. The message was clear to everyone in the room. Marco guided her to a seat. Not at Park Do-jin's side where Jisoo would normally sit, but close enough that the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The executives whispered in Korean, words she only half caught. American. Cleaning lady. Too bold. Doesn't know her place. She kept her spine straight and her expression neutral, channeling every ounce of confidence she didn't feel. The dinner was traditional Korean, course after course of dishes Evelyn couldn't name, served with ritual formality that felt more like theater than eating. She watched the others, mimicking their movements, aware that every gesture was being evaluated. Then Ji-yeon arrived. The room's energy shifted instantly. Ji-yeon entered like she owned the space, wearing white silk that made her look ethereal and untouchable. She was poised, perfect, everything Evelyn would never be. Korean aristocracy with centuries of breeding behind her cold smile. Darling, Ji-yeon said in Korean, moving directly to Park Do-jin and placing a proprietary hand on his shoulder. Forgive my lateness. Traffic from Shanghai was dreadful. She switched to English without missing a beat, her accent flawless as she turned those ice blue eyes on Evelyn. And you must be the American everyone's been talking about. How novel. The word novel carried the weight of temporary, of amusing, of insignificant. Park Do-jin's expression remained neutral, but Evelyn noticed the slight tension in his jaw. Yeon. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Weren't you? Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Our families have had this dinner planned for weeks, Do-jin. Surely you haven't forgotten. The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn understood with perfect clarity. This wasn't just dinner. This was a display of power, of territory, of who truly belonged in Park Do-jin's world, and who was just visiting. Ji-yeon took the seat directly at Park Do-jin's right hand, the position Evelyn had assumed would be empty. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd sat there hundreds of times before, who knew exactly where she belonged in this hierarchy. Throughout dinner, Ji-yeon performed perfection. Her Korean was impeccable, her manners flawless, her understanding of business discussions deep and strategic. When she spoke, executives listened. When she smiled, it was calculated to reinforce her position. And every gesture, every word, every glance at Evelyn carried the same message. You're playing in a world you don't understand, with rules you'll never master, against a woman who was born for this. After dinner, guests moved to the garden. Traditional Korean landscaping with carefully placed stones and water features that probably cost more than Evelyn's Cornell tuition. Park Do-jin was pulled into conversations with executives, leaving Evelyn standing alone near a koi pond, feeling desperately out of place. Ji-yeon appeared beside her like a ghost materializing from shadows. The hanbok suits you, she said, voice carrying false kindness. Do-jin has good taste when he's shopping for his assets. Evelyn met her eyes. I'm his strategic analyst. Is that what he's calling it now? Ji-yeon's smile never wavered. I've known Do-jin since we were children. Our engagement was arranged when I was 16. Political alliance, yes, but also tradition. His family, my family. This is how empires are built. She gestured to the estate around them. You see all this? This is his world. Not late-night tea and American baseball. This is duty, tradition, expectations that go back generations. You're an interesting distraction, Miss Hart. But you're not built for this life. And you are? Evelyn asked, hating how defensive she sounded. I was born for it. Ji-yeon's certainty was absolute. I speak 5 languages. I understand the politics of 3 countries' underworlds. I know which battles to fight and which to surrender. I can sit through 12-hour negotiation dinners and smile while men twice my age test my resolve. She paused. Can you? Before Evelyn could respond, Park Do-jin appeared. His presence shifted the energy immediately. Ji-yeon's cold confidence tempered by something that looked almost like calculation. A moment, he said to Ji-yeon, not a request. She bowed with perfect form and glided away. Park Do-jin turned to Evelyn, and in his eyes she saw something complicated. Frustration. Possession. Maybe even apology. Why didn't you tell me you were engaged? Evelyn asked quietly. Business arrangement. It means nothing. Right. The word came out bitter. I'm the business arrangement that solves puzzles. She's the one you're actually going to marry. Evelyn. But she was already walking away, back toward the house, needing distance before she said something that would cost her everything. She tried the door she'd entered through, but it was locked. Tried another. Locked. Every exit required a code she didn't have. She turned, and Park Do-jin was there, watching her realize the truth. Am I a guest or a prisoner? She asked. His answer was simple, absolute. You're mine. There's no category for that. Through the garden windows, Evelyn saw Ji-yeon and Jisoo standing together, watching them. Two women who understood this world in ways she never would. Forming an alliance against the outsider who dared to matter. And in that moment, Evelyn understood. She wasn't fighting for Park Do-jin's attention anymore. She was fighting for survival. Evelyn stopped going to his office after midnight. Stopped accepting tea. Stopped letting the conversations drift into territory that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the dangerous intimacy growing between them. Self-preservation, she told herself. Professional boundaries. She was his analyst, his asset, his possession, but she didn't have to be his confidant. Didn't have to let herself feel things that would only make the cage hurt more. Park Do-jin noticed. Of course he noticed. But he didn't push, didn't demand, didn't use his considerable power to force the intimacy back. The restraint surprised her more than the possession had. He simply watched her with those dark, calculating eyes and let her build her walls. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like loss. 3 weeks after Liam arrived in Switzerland, Evelyn's video call showed her a miracle. Her brother sat up in bed without coughing, color returning to his cheeks, eyes bright for the first time in months. The treatment's working, Eve. Dr. Weber says I'm in remission. Actually mischien. Liam's smile was blinding. You saved my life. No, Evelyn said quietly, watching her brother's joy through a screen while understanding the true cost. Someone else did. After the call ended, she sat in her luxury apartment, the one with locks on the outside, and did the math. $500,000 for treatment. Unknown millions for the private jet, the specialists, the around-the-clock care. Her visa. Her apartment. Her salary. Her very survival. She owed Park Do-jin everything. Could never repay. Could never leave. Could never be free. The debt wasn't financial. It was existential. And they both knew it. The lunch invitation came from Ji-yeon 3 days later. Elegant calligraphy on expensive cardstock, requesting Evelyn's presence at a private restaurant in Gangnam. Not requesting. Commanding, in the polite way that powerful Korean women did. Evelyn went because refusing wasn't really an option. Ji-yeon sat like royalty in a private room overlooking Seoul, wearing Chanel and certainty. Her smile was pitying, which was somehow worse than hostility. You think you're special. Ji-yeon's English was impeccable, each word precisely chosen. You're not the first brilliant person Do-jin has brought into his organization. He's had dozens over the years. Analysts, strategists, people who thought their intelligence made them indispensable. She sipped her wine, letting the words settle like poison. They all thought they mattered. They didn't. A pause. Neither do you. Evelyn kept her expression neutral, but something cold coiled in her stomach. He's using you the same way he uses everyone, until you're no longer useful. Then you'll be retired like all the others. Ji-yeon leaned forward, her voice almost kind. I'm telling you this as a courtesy. Don't mistake his attention for affection. Don't think you're different. You're just a temporary fascination. The seeds of doubt planted themselves deep. Because Ji-yeon was right about one thing. Evelyn had started to think she was different. Had started to believe the midnight conversations meant something beyond strategic asset management. Foolish. Dangerous. Exactly the kind of emotional thinking that got people killed in Park Do-jin's world. That night, the Yakuza made their boldest move yet. The attack came at 8:47 p.m., right in the Park Enterprises lobby. Not subtle. Not hidden. 3 black vans, 15 armed men. A firefight that left 2 security guards dead, and the marble floors running red. The message was delivered by the lead attacker before Marco's team eliminated him. Surrender the Busan territory, or they'd take what mattered most. Everyone assumed they meant business interests, territory, money, power. Then Marco showed Park Do-jin the surveillance photo the Yakuza had left behind, deliberately, tauntingly, a promise of what was coming. It was Evelyn, leaving Park Enterprises 2 days ago. The crosshairs digitally imposed over her face made the threat crystal clear. Marco had worked for Park Do-jin for 8 years, had seen him kill without hesitation, negotiate without emotion, destroy rivals without mercy. He'd never seen the boss lose control. Until now. Park Do-jin's expression went from ice-cold calculation to something Marco couldn't quite name. Rage. Fear. Possession so absolute it bordered on madness. Send her to Singapore, Park Do-jin said, his voice barely controlled. Tonight. Our office there. Maximum security. Boss. Now. But when Marco went to collect Evelyn from her apartment, she was already standing in the doorway, clearly having watched the security footage herself. No, she said simply. Miss Hart, it's not a request. I don't care. She pushed past Marco, stormed into Park Do-jin's office without knocking, fury overriding survival instinct. You don't get to exile me because I'm a complication. Park Do-jin stood at his windows, hands clenched behind his back, every line of his body radiating tension. You're leaving. Tonight. This isn't negotiable. Everything with you is negotiable. Evelyn shot back. I'm your asset, remember? Your possession? You said so yourself. So stop pretending this is about my safety and admit you're scared. He turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Not anger. Something rawer. You're not a complication. The words came out rough, almost broken. You're the only thing I can't afford to lose. The admission hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Evelyn stared at him, processing what he'd just said. What he'd just revealed. Park Do-jin seemed to realize it too. His jaw tightened, control slamming back into place like armor. You leave tomorrow. 6 Uhr morgens. Pack what you need. He walked past her, out of his own office, leaving Evelyn standing alone with the echo of words he clearly wished he could take back. You're the only thing I can't afford to lose. She stood there for a long time, looking out at Seoul's glittering lights, and wondered when exactly she'd stopped being an asset and become something far more dangerous. Neither of them would admit it, but they both knew nothing would be the same after tonight. Park Min-jun walked into the executive boardroom 3 days after the Yakuza attack like he owned it. In another timeline he would have. He was Park Do-jin's cousin, older by 2 years, groomed for leadership since childhood, the one everyone had expected to inherit the family empire when the previous generation stepped down. Then Do-jin's father had chosen his son instead. And Min-jun had spent the last 8 years smiling through his resentment, playing the loyal cousin while building his own power base in the shadows. He was everything Do-jin wasn't. Traditional, deferential to elders, comfortable with the old ways of doing business. The family had loved him for it. Right up until Do-jin proved more ruthless, more strategic, and infinitely more dangerous. Now Min-jun sat across from Ji-yeon in a private room in Gangnam, far from any surveillance Do-jin might have access to, and they discussed the future of the Park Empire. The American woman is his weakness, Ji-yeon said, sipping green tea with practiced elegance. I've never seen him lose control like this. Over anyone. Then we use her. Min-jun's smile was cold. Remove Do-jin, restore traditional leadership. Your family gets the Busan territory they want. I get the empire my father should have given me. Everyone wins. Except the cleaning lady who thinks she matters. Collateral damage. Min-jun shrugged. Jisoo has been providing her schedule, her movements, her vulnerabilities. The Yakuza are ready to move when we give the signal. What they didn't know was that Marco had already found evidence of the betrayal, encrypted messages, unusual money transfers, meetings that shouldn't have happened. He just didn't know who yet. Park Do-jin stood at his windows on the 49th floor, staring out at Seoul while Marco laid out what he'd discovered. The city glittered below them, indifferent to conspiracies and coups. Someone inside is feeding information to the Yakuza, Marco said carefully. High-level access. Someone who knows Evelyn's schedule. I know. Park Do-jin's voice was flat. Marco looked up, surprised. You know? Then why haven't you? My cousin has always wanted my position. Park Do-jin didn't turn from the window. I've known for years. Kept him close to watch him. Know your enemies, Marco. Especially the ones who share your blood. Boss, if you know he's a threat. Family loyalty is complicated. The words came out tired. You wouldn't understand. But later that night, when Evelyn reviewed the financial data Marco had compiled, she understood perfectly. She walked into Park Do-jin's office at midnight, the first time she'd sought him out in 3 weeks, and found him still working. Your cousin is planning a coup, she said without preamble. The evidence is all here. Money transfers to Yakuza accounts, meetings with Ji-yeon's family, Jisoo providing my schedule. She set the tablet on his desk. You know what's coming. Why wait? Park Do-jin looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Family loyalty is complicated. You wouldn't understand. I understand that loyalty that isn't returned is just suicide. Evelyn's voice was sharp with American directness. He's going to kill you. Or me. Or both. And you're going to let him because of some outdated sense of obligation to blood. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. She leaned forward, hands on his desk. You taught me to think strategically. So think strategically. He's a threat. Eliminate the threat. Or did all those lessons about ruthlessness only apply to everyone except family? The silence stretched. Then Park Do-jin's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. You're learning. 3 weeks of escalating tension followed. Min-jun made his moves carefully, consolidating allies, spreading rumors about Do-jin's weakness, positioning himself as the traditional choice for leadership. Ji-yeon played her part perfectly, the dutiful fiancée worried about her future husband's distraction. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Evelyn and Park Do-jin fell back into their old rhythm despite every reason not to. The late-night working sessions resumed. Not by design, but by necessity. They were planning for war, and that required the kind of strategic thinking that worked best at midnight with tea going cold between them. One night, reviewing security protocols for the 100th time, Evelyn felt his eyes on her instead of the documents. What? She asked without looking up. Nothing. But he didn't look away. She finally met his gaze. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. All the distance she tried to create had collapsed in 3 weeks of forced proximity and shared danger. Do-jin, she rarely used his given name. It felt too intimate. He stood, crossed to her side of the desk. She should have moved away. Should have maintained the professional distance. Should have remembered Ji-yeon and duty and all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she stayed perfectly still as he reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw with unexpected gentleness. This is a mistake, she whispered. I know. Then he kissed her, and it wasn't gentle at all. It was desperate, possessive, everything they'd been holding back crashing together at once. Evelyn's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he responded by lifting her onto the desk, documents scattering forgotten to the floor. No more tea time restraint. No more careful distance. Just heat and desperation, and the certainty that they were both falling into something that would destroy them. His phone rang. They froze, breathing hard, still tangled together. Park Do-jin pulled back enough to check the screen, and his expression went cold. Liam, he said, handing her the phone. The call was from Dr. Weber. Complications. Infection. Liam needed Do-jin's personal physician again immediately. Evelyn took the phone with shaking hands, and reality crashed back. The moment shattered. Why are you doing all this? She asked after the call ended, after arrangements had been made, after Park Do-jin had mobilized resources across continents with 3 phone calls. The treatment. The protection. Everything. Why? Park Do-jin looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Because you're mine. I protect what's mine. Not romantic words. Not declarations of love or promises of forever. Just possession, absolute and unyielding. But somehow, coming from him, they meant everything. It was Tuesday at 9:23 p.m., when everything Evelyn had been afraid of finally happened. She'd been working late, again, analyzing financial projections that couldn't wait until morning. The office had emptied hours ago, just her and the skeleton security crew that usually guarded the building after dark. She packed her laptop, grabbed her coat, and headed for the parking garage. Her usual security detail wasn't there. She noticed immediately, trained by months of surveillance to recognize when shadows were missing. But Jisoo had assured her earlier that evening the detail had been reassigned. Something about a high-priority threat elsewhere. It had seemed reasonable at the time. It wasn't. They came from 3 directions, professional, efficient, moving with the coordinated precision of men who'd been planning this for weeks. One grabbed her from behind, hand over her mouth before she could scream. Another jabbed something into her neck, chemical burn, world tilting sideways. The third was already pulling a van around. Back doors open like a mouth waiting to swallow her. She fought, kicked, tried to remember the self-defense Park Do-jin's guards had taught her. But there were 3 of them and her vision was already blurring, consciousness slipping through her fingers like water. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Korean spoken in accents that weren't Korean at all. Yakuza. When Evelyn woke, she was tied to a chair in a warehouse that smelled like rust and old blood. Her head throbbed where they'd hit her, and when she tried to move, zip ties bit into her wrists hard enough to cut off circulation. The warehouse was abandoned, windows broken, Seoul's lights visible in the distance but impossibly far away. She was somewhere outside the city. Somewhere no one would hear her scream. Awake. Good. The voice was Korean, but the face that stepped into the light made her blood run cold. Not because it was unfamiliar, because it was too familiar. Park Min-jun stood in front of her, wearing expensive clothes and a smile that belonged on something dead. "You're Do-jin's cousin," Evelyn said, her voice rough. "And you're the American whore who's made him forget his family's ways." Min-jun circled her like a predator. Distracted by a foreign woman. Weak. Emotional. Everything our grandfather warned against. Behind him, Yakuza enforcers stood in the shadows, 6 of them that Evelyn could see, probably more she couldn't. This wasn't a kidnapping. This was an execution waiting to happen. "Here's how this works," Min-jun said, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. "You tell me Do-jin's offshore account numbers, his security protocols, his personal routines. Everything that will make removing him easier. And if I don't, then we hurt you until you do." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the mistake Do-jin had made. He'd kept his cousin close, thinking surveillance was control. But Min-jun had been planning this for years, building his own empire in the spaces Do-jin didn't watch. "You'll kill me anyway," Evelyn said. "Why would I help you?" "Minune smiluitend. Because we'll make it hurt less. We'll torture you until you talk, Miss Hart. Everyone talks eventually." "No." Evelyn met his eyes. "They don't. You think you're brave?" "I think I've spent 3 years watching my brother die slowly. Watching him cough up blood, watching him waste away, knowing there was nothing I could do to save him." Her voice was steady, cold. "You have nothing I'm afraid of." The first blow came fast, Min-jun's fist across her face, her head snapping to the side hard enough that she tasted blood. The second broke something in her ribs, pain exploding white-hot through her chest. Hours blurred together. Questions she wouldn't answer. Pain that became a constant companion. Min-jun methodical, precise, knowing exactly how to hurt without killing. The Yakuza watching with professional detachment, occasionally offering suggestions in Japanese. But Evelyn gave them nothing. Not the account numbers. Not the security protocols. Not Do-jin's routines or weaknesses or the 100 small details that would make him vulnerable. She bit her tongue until it bled. Focused on the pain until it became background noise. Thought about Liam, about Cornell, about midnight tea sessions and the man who'd said you're mine like it was a vow. Why protect him? Min-jun asked, frustrated now, his control slipping. He owns you. Uses you. You're nothing but a temporary asset. Evelyn spat blood onto the concrete floor. Then I guess being nothing means you get nothing from me. Back at Park Enterprises, Park Do-jin stood at his windows at 10:47 p.m. and felt the first tendril of wrongness crawl up his spine. Evelyn wasn't answering her phone. He called again. Straight to voicemail. Called her apartment. Nothing. Called Marco. Where is she? Marco's pause was too long. Boss, her security detail was reassigned. Jisoo's orders. Said there was a priority threat. Find her. Now. It took Marco 17 minutes to pull the security footage. 17 minutes of Park Do-jin standing perfectly still, while his world collapsed around him. The footage showed everything. Evelyn walking to her car, the detail missing, 3 men materializing from shadows, the kidnapping so efficient it was over in 90 seconds. Marco's investigation moved fast after that. Jisoo's orders traced back to forged authorization. Financial transfers between Minjun and Yakuza accounts. Encrypted messages planning this exact scenario. His cousin. His blood. The family loyalty he'd protected for 8 years had been a knife aimed at his back the entire time. Ji-yeon arrived at Park Enterprises at 11:34 p.m., summoned by Marco's urgent call. She walked into Do-jin's office wearing concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Do-jin, what's happened? Marco said it was urgent. She's just a cleaner. Park Do-jin's voice was flat, emotionless, the kind of calm that preceded violence. That's what you said. Why risk war over a cleaner? Ji-yeon's expression flickered. I don't understand. Evelyn. The American woman you've been working so hard to eliminate. He turned from the window, and the look in his eyes made even Ji-yeon step back. Why risk war? Because she's mine. That's the only reason I need. Do-jin, be reasonable. Your cousin, my family, the Yakuza alliance, you'd destroy everything for. Everything is already destroyed. He pulled the engagement ring from his pocket, the one he'd been carrying for political obligation, and set it on the desk between them. We're done. Your family can consider this a declaration. You're breaking our engagement? For her. Ye ones mesk korrekt. You'll insult my family, risk their alliance, start a war. I've already started it. Marco had assembled 20 of their most loyal men in the time it took Park Do-jin to break his engagement. Armed, armored, ready for the kind of violence that would make the Yakuza attack look civilized. Boss, we have a location, Marco said. Abandoned warehouse 40 minutes outside Seoul. Minjun's been there for the last 3 hours. Park Do-jin loaded his gun with movements so controlled they looked mechanical. Then we're done talking. The battle was brutal and efficient. Park Do-jin didn't send his men. He led them, moving through that warehouse like death itself, eliminating Yakuza with calculated precision. This wasn't business. This was personal. And everyone who'd touched what was his would pay in blood. He found Evelyn in a room at the back, still tied to the chair, face swollen and bloodied. Ribs clearly broken from the way she was breathing. But her eyes were still open, still defiant, still fighting. You came, she whispered. The words rough with pain and something that sounded like wonder. Park Do-jin crossed to her, cut the zip ties with his knife, caught her before she could fall. Did you doubt I would? Behind him, Minjun's body cooled on the warehouse floor, killed in the firefight before Do-jin could reach him. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was the last kindness family loyalty deserved. Park Do-jin was halfway to the warehouse exit, carrying Evelyn in his arms, when Minjun's voice stopped him cold. Cousin. Do-jin turned. Minjun stood 20 feet away, bleeding from a shoulder wound but still holding a gun. His expensive suit was torn, face twisted with rage, and something that looked like betrayal. You've become weak, Minjun said, his voice shaking. Our grandfather would be ashamed, throwing away a strategic alliance, destroying family unity, all for an American woman who means nothing. Park Do-jin set Evelyn down carefully against the wall, positioning himself between her and the gun. He'd be ashamed I tolerated your betrayal this long. Betrayal? Minjun laughed, the sound bitter. I'm trying to save this family. You're the one destroying everything we built. Everything our grandfather sacrificed for. You mean everything he stole? Park Do-jin's voice was flat. Everything he murdered for. Everything he forced his children to inherit whether they wanted it or not. The warehouse around them was burning now. Fires started during the firefight, spreading through dry wood and forgotten chemicals. Smoke filled the air, making breathing difficult. You'll destroy everything our family built, Min-jun said, gun trembling in his hand. Good. Park Do-jin's response was immediate. I'll build something better. Min-jun raised the gun, aimed it at Evelyn. Then you'll do it alone. Park Do-jin moved faster. His shot caught Min-jun's center mass, the impact spinning him backward. Family blood spilled on concrete, mixing with Yakuza blood, all the same color in the end. Min-jun fell, eyes wide with shock, hand reaching toward his cousin one last time before going still. Park Do-jin stood there for a moment, looking at his cousin's body, feeling nothing. Then he turned back to Evelyn, lifted her again, and walked out of the burning warehouse without looking back. Outside, Marco had the car waiting. Park Do-jin slid into the back with Evelyn still in his arms, and as Seoul's lights grew closer, he finally spoke. I'm sorry. I should have protected you better. Evelyn's swollen eyes found his. You came for me. That's enough. 3 days later, Evelyn woke in a private hospital suite that looked more like a luxury hotel. Silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, medical equipment disguised as furniture. Her ribs were wrapped, face healing, for dripping something that made the pain bearable. Park Do-jin sat in a chair beside her bed, slumped in sleep, still holding her hand. She'd never seen him like this, exhausted, guards completely down, stubble darkening his jaw. He looked younger somehow. More human. The monster Seoul feared reduced to a man who'd been sitting vigil for 3 days straight. Evelyn reached out with her free hand and touched his face. He woke instantly, those dark eyes focusing on her with an intensity that stole her breath. You're awake. So are you now. Her voice was rough from disuse. They stared at each other in the morning light, and all the words they'd been avoiding hung between them like smoke. What am I to you? Evelyn asked finally. The question that had been building since the first night he'd brought her tea. Park Do-jin didn't look away. Everything I shouldn't want and the only thing I can't lose. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I've spent my entire life being what my family needed me to be. Ruthless. Strategic. Empty. Then you walked into that boardroom with a mop and a yellow sticky note, and saw patterns no one else could see. He paused. You saw me. Not the reputation. Not the power. Just me. Evelyn's throat tightened. I spent so long being invisible. People looked right through me for years. But you, her voice cracked. You see me. Even when I wish you didn't. Park Do-jin leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. I see you, he whispered. I've always seen you. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't desperate or possessive. It was claiming, but mutual. Two people who'd been invisible their entire lives finally being seen. The aftermath was complicated and messy and required every bit of strategic thinking they both possessed. Ji-yeon's family demanded retribution for the broken engagement. The Park family elders were furious about Min-jun's death, threatening to withdraw support entirely. The Yakuza wanted compensation for their losses. Jisoo had disappeared the night of the warehouse attack. Whether fled or silenced, Park Do-jin never said. But he'd learned something from Evelyn. Sometimes you had to destroy everything to build something better. He legitimized parts of the empire, real estate, technology investments, legal business ventures. Kept enough of the shadows to maintain power, but pivoted towards something that wouldn't require quite so much blood. Not good. Not redeemed. Just purposeful. 6 weeks after the warehouse, Park Do-jin made a public announcement at a formal gathering of Seoul's power brokers. Not a Western wedding. A Korean claiming ceremony that carried weight in ways marriage certificates never could. Evelyn Hart is under my protection, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. She is mine. Any attack on her is an attack on me. Anyone who questions this will answer to me personally. The message was clear. She wasn't his employee, his asset, or his analyst. She was his. And he was hers. 2 months later, Liam arrived in Seoul, fully recovered, in remission, looking healthier than Evelyn had seen him in years. Park Do-jin met him at the airport, and the encounter was awkward in the way that mattered. You saved my sister's life, Liam said. She saved mine first, Park Do-jin replied. It wasn't quite friendship, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that was enough. 6 months after the warehouse burned, treaties were signed. Ji-yeon's family accepted massive monetary compensation. The Yakuza war ended with territorial compromises that left everyone relatively unsatisfied, which meant it was probably fair. Jisoo was never seen again. Park Do-jin never confirmed what happened to her, but Evelyn knew better than to ask. Some questions didn't need answers. 1 year later, Evelyn stood in the penthouse apartment that no longer felt like a prison, watching Seoul's endless lights while Park Do-jin worked at his desk. She'd learned Korean fluently. He'd learned to play baseball. They'd both learned that love in their world looked different than the stories promised, but it was theirs. "Do you regret it?" she asked without turning around. "Choosing me over everything else?" Park Do-jin set down his pen and crossed to stand behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "I regret nothing that led me to you." Not romantic words. He wasn't that kind of man. But honest ones. And somehow, that meant everything. Seoul looked different at night now. The same neon sprawl, the same restless energy, but Evelyn saw it through different eyes. She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. This city had become something close to home. Though she'd never quite belong the way someone born here would, and she'd stopped trying. The foundation office occupied the 15th floor of a building in Gangnam, deliberately modest compared to Park Enterprises' towering headquarters 10 blocks away. The brass plaque by the door read, Second Chance Scholarship Foundation, in Korean and English. No mention of who funded it. No connection to the Park family empire. Just an anonymous organization that somehow had endless resources to help immigrant workers' children attend university. Evelyn sat at her desk, reviewing applications on dual monitors, her mathematical mind optimizing impact the way it once optimized profit. Which students showed the most potential? Which families needed help most urgently? How could they maximize everyone to change the most lives? She'd learned Korean fluently over 5 years, could negotiate with university administrators, argue with bureaucrats, and hold her own in meetings with corporate sponsors who didn't know they were laundering Park Do-jin's money through legitimate charity. But she'd kept her American directness, the refusal to bow deeper than necessary, the habit of looking people directly in the eye when speaking. Not a traditional Korean wife. Not even close. An equal partner in an unconventional arrangement that Seoul's elite still whispered about, but no longer questioned openly. The office door opened, and Evelyn heard them before she saw them. Her daughter's rapid-fire Korean and her son's slower, more careful English, the two languages mixing effortlessly the way they always did. Oma. 4-year-old Min Seo ran in first, dark hair flying, speaking Korean with her father's Seoul accent. "Look what we made." She held up a painting, abstract splashes of color that might have been a family, or might have been chaos. "That's beautiful, baby," Evelyn said in English, then repeated it in Korean because Min Seo preferred her mother's voice in her father's language. 6-year-old Daniel followed more cautiously, speaking English with his mother's American rhythm. "Dad let us paint in his office." Marco wasn't happy about it. He grinned, knowing exactly how much power a child's smile held over his father's dangerous right-hand man. Park Do-jin entered last, carrying a messenger bag in one hand and Min Seo's tiny backpack in the other. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than most people's cars, but there was paint on his sleeve, evidence of an afternoon spent with children who didn't fear him. "They insisted on seeing you before dinner," he said, switching seamlessly between Korean and English mid-sentence the way their entire family did now. Evelyn stood, and Min Seo immediately wrapped around her legs while Daniel showed her the mathematical puzzle he'd been working on. His mother's gift manifesting early. Park Do-jin watched them with an expression that still surprised her sometimes. Soft. Unguarded. The monster Seoul feared reduced to a man who let his children paint in his office and smiled when they got paint on his expensive suits. The empire had changed too. 60% legitimate now. Tech investments, real estate development, venture capital that funded startups across Asia. The other 40% existed in shadows, necessary to maintain the power that kept them all safe. But even that had shifted. Less violence. More strategy. Purpose instead of pure profit. People still feared Park Do-jin. Still whispered his name carefully. still understood that crossing him meant consequences. But now he was feared for what he could build as much as what he could destroy. The children knew, of course. Not everything. They were too young for complete truth. But they understood their father was different. Understood the guards who followed them everywhere. Understood that some of Daddy's business meetings happened in rooms Mommy didn't ask about. And they understood absolutely that both their parents would burn the world down to keep them safe. After the children tired of showing their artwork, Park Do-jin took them to the window, pointing out landmarks in Seoul's glittering expanse while explaining the city's history in Korean. Daniel asked questions in English. Min-seo answered in Korean. Neither thought it was strange. Evelyn watched her family, impossible, unconventional, theirs, and felt something she'd spent most of her life not believing in. Belonging. Park Do-jin glanced back at her, caught her watching, and raised an eyebrow. A question without words. What are you thinking? She crossed to stand beside him. Their daughter immediately claiming her hand. Their son leaning against her side. Do you ever regret choosing this? Evelyn asked quietly in Korean, the language that still felt like effort but also like home now. Park Do-jin looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he had that first night when she'd been just a cleaning lady with a yellow sticky note. Then he looked at their children, at the foundation office, at Seoul spreading below them. I regret nothing that led me to you. He switched to English, knowing she still preferred her mother tongue for important things. Every choice. Every consequence. Every burned bridge and declared war. I'd make them all again. Not romantic. Not poetic. Just honest. The way he'd always been with her. Daniel tugged his sleeve. Dad, can we get ice cream? Min-seo immediately joined in. Ice cream. Please, 아빠. Park Do-jin, Seoul's most feared crime lord, the man who'd killed his own cousin and destroyed a Yakuza alliance, looked down at his daughter's pleading eyes and surrendered immediately. Fine. But your mother chooses where. As they gathered their things, Evelyn caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. A Korean man in an expensive suit. An American woman in practical clothes. Two children who belonged to both worlds and neither. A family that shouldn't exist but did. Hey, she said, catching Park Do-jin's hand before they left. He stopped waiting. I love you. Still difficult to say, even after 5 years. Still feeling too vulnerable, too exposed. His expression softened in the way it only did for her and their children. 나도 사랑해. I love you too. Then switching to English. Even when you wish I didn't see you. She smiled, remembering that conversation in a hospital room 5 years ago. Especially then. They left the foundation office as a family, guards following at a discreet distance, heading toward ice cream and normalcy, and all the small moments that made a life. Behind them, Seoul glittered in the darkness, beautiful, brutal, and endlessly complicated. Just like them. Dear friends, thank you for staying with this story until the very end. How did the journey of Evelyn and Park Do-jin make you feel? Did it remind you of anything in your own life? Please leave a comment below to share what's in your heart. We would truly love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share it with friends and loved ones, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another moving story. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Remember, intelligence is power, loyalty is currency, and sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone see who you really are. Goodbye and see you again in the next story.